That's perfect. Okay, so I took this class, Mark Twain, because a few years ago I found out I was actually related to Mark Twain. I think he's trying to blind me. And so, yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, I can see my paper. Okay, so I wanted to get a little more history on him, and I found this class to be so entertaining and fun, and so I hope that you enjoy my paper that I wrote specifically for my father. And like Charlie said, it's the Chronicles of Jim Beam. As far back as I can remember, my father was known by all. Everyone knew his name. Everyone knew our family name. Growing up, I always admired him with my eyes glimmering with childlike innocence. I was always so proud that he seemed to have so many friends. They'd giggle as we walked by and wave with friendly smiles on their faces. I never did understand why our family was never included in the invitations to the block parties. It wasn't until later, when I grew older and had grown wiser, that I came to realize my father was the laugh of the town. He was in reality not the friend I thought he was. He was not the respected man I had assumed he was. He was, in fact, the small-town drunk they tried to depict in movies, but failed miserably in their attempts. I do have to say, though, despite the fact he was a drunk, he was a very hard worker, and he loved his family fiercely in his own abusive, detached, emotionally unstable, and unavailable kind of way. He loved us. My father in a nutshell. He was quiet, unless he had his guitar and was singing the songs that still flood my mind to this day. He had his chair, and for over 30 years he wore the same outfit every day. Overalls, a white t-shirt, and a red and white trucker hat, and he always had his Jim Beam in hand. We lived in Port Orford, Oregon, which would have been the modern-day Mayberry had it been set in an oceanside town kind of scene. We always knew that if he wasn't at work, we could find him at the local tavern or in a jail cell sleeping it off just like a modern-day Otis from the Andy Griffith Show. He was an intelligent man in an uneducated body, unless, of course, he was hopped up on Jim Beam whiskey. My father's name was Jim. Fitting, don't you think? I can recall a time when he came home with 12 rabbits. My mom, in all her infuriation, interrogated him as to how he acquired the rabbits. He sincerely explained that he had traded his and her Harleys for the rabbits. At the time, he thought it was a great deal. I believe it's in high school where you begin to learn the skills of reasoning, and being that my dad was kicked out of school in the 8th grade for decking the dean, it makes perfect sense why he made such illogical decisions. He received a letter in the mail along with his 8th grade diploma that said he was not to return to school. It was a cold September night in September when my mother pulled me and my sisters out of bed for another late-night adventure to collect my father from the tavern he was escorted out of for the 100th time. She had just received a call from the tavern manager yelling at her to pick up her husband as he was obnoxiously disturbing the peace of the other patrons. She loaded us in the truck that my dad called Old Yeller, and off we went late into the night on another excursion to drag him home. Of course, when we arrived, he insisted on driving. My mother, being the responsible parent she was, allowed him to drive the truck home with all of us unbuckled in the back seat. We were not a full 3 minutes down the road before we took out 3 bushes, a small road sign, and a deer. My dad, being a man that saw and seized all opportunities, threw the deer in the back of the truck, and off we went heading for home. It was a miracle of the Lord to see that deer be resurrected back to life a mile down the road, bucking and kicking as he attempted to orientate himself for his escape. He got his bearings, and right before he could jump out, my dad stumbled out of the truck, grabbed the deer, snapped his neck, and assured we'd have meat for the winter. And that's how we became poachers. One day while we were at school, my dad got drunk and decided to clean the well that supplied all the water on the property. He took down a bottle of bleach and scrubbing brush, and after some time had passed, we arrived home from school and heard a faint cry for help. We followed the sound of his desperate cries to the well, where we found him trapped below. He told us to run and get Grandpa to help rescue him from the belly of the well. When we found Grandpa, he too was intoxicated, or as the grown-ups said back then, 3 sheets to the wind and barely coherent. Looking back, the math don't add up. The well was deep and narrow. My dad was 300 pounds and 6 feet 4 inches tall. Probably not the best idea to go head down the well drunk. How he got down that well to this day, I'll never know. My grandpa came around the corner with a rope and the truck keys. He threw one end of the rope down to the well and tied the other end to the truck and attempted to pull him out. He got into his truck and began to drive. The bumper flew off the back of the truck, slamming against the well wall. He then tied the rope to the front bumper and attempted this time to back him out. My dad came flying out of the well, his eyes filled with terror, and took half the wall well with him. We did not have the money to fix the well. He had contaminated the well water with the bleach and had destroyed the well in the attempt to be freed. Therefore, we had to pack our belongings and head to the next town that would become our home for the season until something happened that forced us to pick up and move once again. Gazing back into my childhood years, I am filled with memories, but none a memory so fonder than the time my dad woke up from another one of his drunken stoops and urged my mom to call into work as he just could not bear the day. She refused, so coming to a compromise, he left her with instructions to call work in a couple hours with a fake emergency so he could leave for the day. She agreed. Sure enough, about 2 hours and 30 minutes later, my mother called frantic. She began screaming at him that the house was on fire and that he needed to leave work and come home right away. He put his best worried face on, face of a concerned husband and father, and rushed out to aid his family in this great crisis. He jumped in Old Yeller and took off speeding down the road towards the tavern, thinking to himself, man, gotta give credit to my girl. That was a good one. Almost had me believing. About a couple hours later, after a few more drinks down, he came swerving into the driveway, only to find us all in our pajamas standing on the front lawn of our house, and our house in ashes to the ground. You could still hear the wood popping from the embers underneath. The smell of smoke still filled the air, and hell hath no fury like the rage that was unleashed when my mother got a hold of him. On a positive note, this house was right by the river. And being that it was by the river, our house was infested with 2-pound river rats. Seriously, they were like this big. They lived in the attics and the rafters of our house. I remember one time when I was young, I got up in the middle of the night, stumbled to the kitchen, half asleep, for a glass of water, when one of the rats fell out of the rafters and landed on my head. From that day on, I was terrified of rats and other small furry creatures. At the time, I was not sad to see that house go up in flames. That meant that all those rats met their fiery demise. The trauma came as it hit me that I lost all of my toys and clothes because my dad, in his morning intoxication due to his crack of dawn dose of Jim Beam, had caused the fire. He had added more wood and pitch to the stove so it would be warmer in the house, which caused the fire to break out in the first place. We packed the little we had left in the shed out back, and my dad and sister sang while he played the guitar as my mom packed the car. So began our trek to Mariposa. We arrived in Mariposa in April, where my father found that work was discouraging. He began stealing tires from the local trailer park and selling them at the gas station for $2 apiece. This supplied him with his booze money for the week. One time, while on a roll selling these stolen tires, Old Yeller got a flat. He went to the back of the truck and realized he had also sold his own tire for such an occasion, as the unfortunate event that he found himself stranded on the side of the road. We arrived in Mariposa where my aunt and uncle lived. It went well for a while. One day, my uncle called us with a problem, and being the Mr. Fix-It my dad was, headed over to my aunt and uncle's house to lend his assistance. After having a few beers with my uncle, they began brainstorming as to how to remove a giant boulder from their lawn that was too heavy to lift. He spent 3 days attempting to dig up and remove the boulder. Finally, on the blessed third day, the stone was rolled away. Through the use of a tractor he somehow acquired, as they watched it roll down the embankment and off the side of the hill, terror struck the faces of not only my father and uncle, but also the group of onlookers who watched, as the boulder, gaining speed and momentum, headed straight for the small chapel at the bottom of the hill. It never stood a chance. The boulder plowed right through the side of the chapel with the power of Zeus taking out the altar of the Lord in its heated rage. Though the boulder was removed from the chapel, it still sits outside the small structure to this day as a reminder why we yet again were socially outcasted. We eventually packed our bags and headed for the next town. We moved into a small house that following winter. Now, when I say small, I mean a 584 square foot palace which housed 4 adults and 4 children. Correction, there were 7 children. Shortly after moving in, my dad's older sister dropped off her 3 children so she could go Christmas shopping and did not return to take them home for 3.5 years. We made the best of it, and music always filled the house and gave us a reason to enjoy being together. I felt so rich in that house. Though it was crammed, I had the biggest backyard in the world. The backyard was my castle, and I was the queen. It was lined with blackberry bushes as far as my eye could see. It was such a treat to go out every morning and gather blackberries for myself, my siblings, and my cousins. After an hour of picking blackberries, I would bring the bowl in to my mother, and she would pour milk over the blackberries, and it would be a special treat that we were lucky enough to have every day. As the manna rained down from heaven to feed the Israelites, so there was never a shortage of blackberries. It was not until I was older and I understood that the reason we ate blackberries and milk every morning was because my dad was drinking part of our money we had set aside for food and couldn't afford cereal. However, one day something amazing happened. My dad discovered food stamps and we were awarded. He headed straight to the hardware store to buy farming equipment. As he left, filled with hope and inspiration to gather equipment to grow his own food, I stood in the driveway waving, so proud of my father. It was a desperate time in my family, so the thought that Dad was not now going to grow his own food was exciting. I had dropped straight out of the Gone with the Wind movie as I thought, God is my witness, I'll never go hungry again. He returned a couple hours later, empty-handed. He walked into the hardware store, attempting to buy a hose, a rake, and various other pieces of equipment with food stamps. As I said before, 8th grade education. He had no idea that these food stamps were to purchase actual food, not equipment, to grow food. He thought he would outsmart the system and buy the necessary items to grow food. He eventually landed a job at the local church, which made my mom happy, who was the holy roller of the family. Being a musician who always had a guitar in hand and a song on his lips, this job put him right in his elements. His duties entitled building the soundstage and running the sound system during service. We were able to get off food stamps and lived a semi-normal life. He worked at the church for 6 years. One day while the preacher spoke, we noticed he seemed a bit distracted. His eyes moved about back and forth across the balcony above the audience, and his face held a cross between disdain and disappointment. After a while, many others started to turn around and gaze up into the balcony, pointing and snickering. My family turned as well to see my father. My mother was absolutely mortified and took off in humiliation to collect him from the balcony where he had made a spectacle of himself in front of the entire church. He had come to church drunk and was in full clown suit, equipped with a red nose, big shoes, and a rainbow-colored wig and all. On top of that, he thought it'd be funny to ride a small tricycle back and forth across the balcony, neglecting his duties entirely. Family reunions were always full of excitement. They always happened during the 4th of July holiday. One family reunion I can recall was particularly memorable. My dad and some of his boys were setting off bottle rockets. He was a pyromaniac and loved anything shiny. especially when he was drunk, because in his mind, the best time to play with fire in a dry field is when your reflexes are too slow to correct anything that may go awry. The only thing I remember from that family reunion in particular was one bottle rocket tipping over accidentally and sending a streamer of fire into the neighbor's house. It was not until we saw a very large woman screaming profanities flying out of the house with her shirt on fire that we realized the bottle rocket had hit someone. She looked like an oversized bag of water balloons being tossed about as she jumped around frantically, ripping her clothes off that were set aflame by the rocket. Being the wonderful, caring, and remorseful people my family was, laughter filled the night air, and the police arrived on the scene shortly after. Of course, they knew my father, so after a few manly handshakes and a promise not to light any more rockets, the night ceased. I'll always remember the food at our reunions. My mom, coming from the South, made the best barbecue and potato salad. My grandmother made an award-winning peach cobbler and melted in your mouth. It was a happy place when my family got together and brought the foods of their respective cultures together. One of my fonder memories of my childhood, music always filled the air. My father would play, and I and my sisters would join in harmony. Now, when I say reunion, I know you must have a picture in your mind of what the American family reunions look like. Different family units with their extended family gathered together, so happy to embrace one another after years of being separated, matching t-shirts for their respective family units, picnic tables garnished with red and white plaid tablecloths and food as far as the eye could see, adults talking and catching up in one area, the men playing cards and dominoes in the other, and the children playing harmoniously. This was not the scene at my reunion. We all hated each other. So there was always a fight that broke out. If you had a bird's eye view of the reunion, you would see the cast of characters playing their parts and never deviating from those roles. It was the same every year. At one end of the table, we have all the men talking about life, making dirty jokes about women, and drinking their brandy and bourbon until they were absolutely belligerent. On the other end of the table, you had my mother. My mother, being the loudest of all Southern Belle holy rollers, preaching in hopes that the sinners at the end of the table would hear, repent of their sins that were taking them on the expressway straight to the fiery depths of hell and give their lives to the Lord. She would quote Bible verses and preach, and in the same breath that she preached the love of God, also judged and condemned the unrighteous sinners. Meanwhile, you could see my grandma over behind a shady tree. She hovered over her cauldron, concocting the perfect spell that would hopefully kill my mother. Simultaneously, she taught the children in secret harmless spells and rituals to spite my God-fearing mother. She would sing the songs of her people who had been burned at the stake for their pagan rituals and beliefs. My grandma, if you didn't put the pieces together by now, was a practicing witch from a long line of witches dating back to the Salem witch trial. I remember one day I came home from school brokenhearted. The love of my life, a boy I'd been pining over for a whole year, developed a crush on one of my close friends. My grandma was my confidant. She was the one who had all the solutions to the problems that could arise. So I went to her for advice. I told her about him, how amazing he was, how I was in love and would never get over this boy. My heart was broken forever and I needed to know what to do. My grandma instructed me, simply put him in the freezer. I was immediately filled with hope. My grandma knew everything. Surely this would work. The next day I returned home early from school. Upon my arrival, my mom asked me why I was home early. I explained that I had gotten suspended. I lured the boy I liked into the cafeteria and locked him in the walk-in freezer. After a while, someone heard his muffled cries and let him out of the freezer. I was called out of class and into the principal's office and suspended. It was not until after the butt-whooping of my life that my grandma clarified her instructions. She did not mean trap the physical person in a giant box of ice. No, what she meant was write his full name on a piece of paper, seal his name in a small container, then put the container in the freezer. It was a ritual that freezes the person out of your life. Tragedy struck my family in the year 1999 when my younger sister passed away at 30. She celebrated her 30th birthday on June 8th and passed away the same month on June 25th. The only time in my whole life I had ever seen my father cry was when his father passed away. But even then, he was not as broken as the day he had to bury his baby. Sorry. My sister was the most musical of all of us. We all sang, we would all harmonize. We would listen to my dad sing and play his guitar, but when Charity left this world, she took the music with her, and silence filled our hearts and home. No one ever picked up a musical instrument or sang together again. The stress of my younger sister's death weighed heavily on my dad, more than he allowed to show through the years. A few years later, he had his first massive heart attack. Everyone rushed to Oregon to be with him. He was in the hospital and, of course, still had his wits about him. I asked him what had happened and asked how he was feeling. He said, "Well, you see, kid, I was doing the Lord's work. I was going door to door and house to house selling my World's Coming to an End lawn chairs, my John the Baptist soap on a rope, and my Sodom and Gomorrah shower rings, when I felt a pain like a horse. It just kicked me in the chest. I bent over, and taking one too many steps, I tripped over her broom and dustpan and fell off the porch. It was a fortunate turn of events when, in a panic, she offered to buy out my entire stock of John the Baptist soap on a rope and even threw in enough Sodom and Gomorrah shower rings for the whole block as long as I promised not to sue her. We agreed, the ambulance came, and here I am." It was 5 years later that my dad suffered another massive heart attack and passed away in 2009. Life was never the same after that. I may have had a less than normal childhood, and though the stories of my younger years are cut with colorful depictions and humor to last a lifetime, in every story there is a tragedy, in every story there is a struggle. Laughter was and is my coping mechanism for survival, so I can still see the light in the darkness and hear the laughter in the midst of despair. If I would have grown up as an only child, or maybe having one other sibling in a middle-class family with a white picket fence, a non-alcoholic father, a mild mother, and a grandma who taught Sunday school rather than spells, I would not be who I am today. I would not see the world as I do. Mostly, I would have nothing to write about.